If you are looking for a natural way to control pests in your garden without having to spray, but simply by planting native plants and crops that attract beneficial insects like the monarch butterfly and ladybugs and birds, then you're going to love today's episode. I have a great conversation with Jacqueline Litton. She shares so many great tips that we can apply to our vegetable garden to have a much more manageable and successful garden with the beauty of flowers and native plants and pollinators and birds. It's so much fun. So let's welcome Jacqueline to the show. Hey, Jacqueline, welcome to the Audrey's Little Farm Show.
Good morning. Hi, Audrey.
Nice to have you today. I'm super excited because we are gardeners literally across the US. You are in Central Florida, I'm in Central California. And even though we have a lot of similar things in the gardening world, we have a lot of differences too. So it's fun to chat.
Yeah, I really enjoy chatting with you. So I'm really glad that we get to share our fun conversations with other people because there are so many similarities between these vastly far apart places, but there are a lot more differences sometimes than people might realize.
Right. Well, what's funny is we actually met in the online space. So I host an online gardening summit, and you've been a speaker the last few times, I believe, or maybe even every event that I've hosted. And so we've gotten to know each other in the online space, which is really fun. And then we have these side conversations where we chat just about random things. And the other day we were having a conversation and we were chatting all about pollinators and plants and native plants and all kinds of things where I wish I could have just pushed record that day. But anyways, we brought you back so we can do this conversation for everyone else to hear. I know they're going to be excited for it. But before we get into the conversation, will you just tell everyone where you're from and what you do? We'll get to all your links and stuff at the end again, but a brief overview and then we'll dive into some fun questions.
So, hi, I'm Jacqueline. I'm the Wild Floridian, and I have a YouTube channel that's all about Florida gardening. I mean, if you're from Florida or you live in Florida or you want to move to Florida, like I've got all the things because Florida is such a unique climate. I have been gardening for 10, 11 years now. My journey kind of started a long time ago. Well, one, we got a house, and then you got a house, you got a yard, and yard has stuff growing in it. So that began like a little mini journey, but then really a lot of my journey started because my oldest son is autistic and was developmentally delayed in eating. And so we were part of his therapy was starting to grow food so that he could have interactions with food without it being about eating. And that really kicked off the journey. And then I had a lot of fails because gardening in Florida is similar, but it's different from a lot of the rest of the country. And I had to figure it out. And there weren't a lot of people talking about how to do it in Florida by itself. And there was really not anyone talking about how to do it in like an urban suburban environment. Everyone else who was kind of talking Florida was like out on 10 acres of land. And so I was trying to figure out how to do it like in a neighborhood in your yard. And that's really how my garden started. And yeah.
Wow. What a cool story. I actually don't think with all of our time, I know you've mentioned your son before, but the whole growing the food so that he could have a different interaction with food. I didn't know that story. And that is really cool. And I'm sure to many listening, very inspiring and just a cool new way to look at gardening. I always like to tell people it's not always about the harvest or the successful crop, but about the process of doing it because you're always going to have fails. And hopefully we have successes, but it's so much more about the journey. And so that's really cool doing that with your son.
Yeah. And for me, I actually found vegetables to be the most challenging to do in Florida. Like growing perennial fruits was easier. And getting into what I know you want to talk about is flowers and native plants was like much easier. And so I think that's one of the other things I kind of bring to the table is because my focus in the beginning wasn't trying to grow a tomato or not like I wasn't worried about getting good harvests or anything like that, but I really liked getting into the butterflies and the birds and the bees and the colors and all that stuff. Is it just kind of gave me a different mindset about when I did get into vegetable gardening about like how I approached it.
Right. Well, I think that's one of the things I've loved so much about getting to talk to you on so many different occasions is because you are so much more into the natives and the flowers. And although I have a lot of those things in my garden, I don't feel as knowledgeable on them. Like I bring these things into my garden because I know I should be planting them. And I actually have another really good friend who is a incredible gardener and she knows all the native plants here in California and all the pollinators and all the flowers that attract this and when to plant that flower. And I feel like I'm much more knowledgeable with vegetables, fruits, and herbs. At a certain point in your gardening journey, you realize to have success, you really have to be somewhat decent at all of them. And then gardening like gets to a whole new level of ease. Like if you only try to grow vegetables without flowers and without herbs and without native
Mm,
plants, it's really hard because you don't get the pollinators you need, and then you get more pests, and it's a lot more difficult.
yeah, very spot on. I feel like if you're a vegetable gardener, bringing in some of the other types of gardening will really give you some new mindsets about what you might want to do. And it might even get you to think outside the box of some of the more traditional vegetable gardening. Because there's a lot of good knowledge in traditional vegetable gardening, but some of it was developed right for like farmers who need to do like acres and acres of one crop. And so they're optimizing for that. And then when you're a smaller at home gardener, I feel like we're taught some things that's like, well, you don't really need to do it that way, but also like maybe that's not the best way to do it when you're an at home gardener, slash, it might not be the best environmentally, or slash, you're making things a lot harder for yourself than they have to be. Because I definitely saw that when I started entering the gardening world. Some of the things people would ask me, I would be like, I don't do that. What are you talking about? Like, you guys are you're making this out like I already think vegetables. I think vegetables are very fussy plants, right? Because like you got to plant them and you got to like harvest them. But some of the pest stuff and the pollinating stuff I was hearing people doing, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't do any of that. And I think when I started really seeing those questions, I was already growing in my suburban. I say, let me clarify. I live in the city of St. Petersburg. So I live in a very urban environment. And if you're not familiar with Florida, St. Petersburg, which is a major city, is immediately next to Tampa, which is a major city. And then there's some other large cities. We all surround the Tampa Bay. So I am in the city, but my neighborhood is a suburban style neighborhood in the city. But I'm only 15 minutes from downtown Tampa and downtown St. Pete. So I'm an urban suburban environment. That's why you'll keep hearing me say that. But like in my own yard, I was growing 500 pounds a year, just in a pretty small space. And so it kind of threw me when people started asking me some of the questions they asked me. And that's why I think it'll be fun to share this with you guys, because there might be some things that will make your life a little easier, whether you live in Florida or not.
Right. Well, I'll try my best to try to keep this maybe in like an organized chronological order of
Yeah.
like what we should do and some tips and whatnot. But I think maybe a fun spot to start. Well, let's just start with like, what are three of the questions you were getting asked that you didn't do? Like, I'm assuming people were probably asking you like, what pesticides do you spray? So let's
Yeah.
start there. So I'm sure I know that was one of the common questions you said the other day that people would always ask, and you don't spray. So can you start there?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a very common question. And I think if you're not living in Florida, well, you may not be aware. We never, from Central and South Florida, we really never get cold enough, or we only get cold enough for 2 days to stop having bug pressure. So there's bugs all the time thinking about eating our plants. So I just want to give that context because I have like cousins who garden in Minnesota and they're like, oh, wait, you're right. You guys really never get like a break reset kind of time. We just constantly are going. So we always have pest pressure. There's never a time we technically don't have pest pressure. And because of that, the question, of course, is like, what do you do about the bugs? Because there's a lot of bugs. And then like in the summer, then there's even more bugs. And I don't spray any pesticides. And this comes from the fact that now I'll take you guys into a different realm, which is the reason I don't spray is because there's ways to manage the bugs that don't require you to get chemicals. And it's not just because like I have happy feelings and I like to hug trees and like native stuff. But, like there's like actually like practical solutions that I do. And they're not a lot of the ones that I typically hear. Like when you kind of end up in like the organic gardening groups, like I'll hear things about like, was it BT spray and neem oil? And I don't know
Mhm.
what, because those are
Yeah,
supposed to be
yeah.
like organic pesticides. And like maybe people don't think of those as pests. I don't do any of that. Like I literally do none of that. So, okay. So do you want to know how I do it? I
Yes.
guess. Okay. So the first part is understanding some basic stuff. And I'm going to take you guys down a little path that's not probably the one that you're used to hearing. And the reason I think of it this way is because I started with native plants and I started a lot with butterfly gardening. I know, hang with me for a minute here. But butterfly gardening, a lot of the goals of a butterfly gardener is to plant plants that bring in the butterflies so that they look pretty and happy, right? The butterflies have nectar, but also we have to do a thing where we bring in host plants. And host plants are the plants that the butterflies put their eggs on, and then the eggs hatch. And then a host plant is the plant that the caterpillar can eat, right? What does that have to do with vegetable gardening? Well, some of your pests are actually butterflies and moths that are going to their host plant. And so, like, the common one that most people know, right, is most people know monarch butterflies and they're going to milkweed. So you might have heard that, but their host plant's milkweed and there's a lot of conservation efforts. Well, your broccoli is a host plant, and so is your tomato plant. And so what's happening is when you're freaking out about how do I kill these, cabbage worms or these tomato hornworms, what you're really doing is you're trying to figure out how to kill a moth or a butterfly. Now, am I telling you you need to like allow the caterpillars to decimate your tomatoes and your cabbages? No. I'm saying that the ways that butterfly gardeners worry about what happens to their caterpillars and they are trying to stop other critters from eating their caterpillars because they want them, we can take those same ideas and apply it to the vegetables to make it easier for predators to get to those caterpillars and use some of those same techniques. So here's some of the techniques that can help you if you want to go butterfly gardening, but are also going to protect your plants. One is a host plant. Even if you want the butterfly, you never want to put it out in a space that they can access when it's really small. So even milkweeds and all the like good native plants, like if the plant's too small, a monarch caterpillar is going to kill it because it doesn't have the root system to bounce back. But host plants are designed, the ones that we talk about in butterfly gardening world, are designed to be eaten and then come back stronger. That's how they survive. That's how they thrive. So if we're starting a new butterfly gardener, we're always looking to put out bigger plants that if one of those little caterpillar comes and eats it, it'll be okay. So how do we take that to our vegetable garden? Well, if I know I have some of the pests in the area already, like let's say I've been growing broccoli and I'm moving into cabbage, since those are part of the same host family, we already have the pests in the area. So I'm going to protect my seedlings when they're under 6 inches because the plant in itself cannot survive a caterpillar, Mr. Very Hungry Caterpillar eating it. So protecting stuff. So it could be bug netting, right? Is a common way, right? People will put like shade cloths or bug netting to protect it. The second thing is putting it in areas that they can't access. So a lot of your daytime butterflies, which I guess that's one of the things, is like a lot of people don't realize some amount of your cabbage moths aren't moths, they're white butterflies. So they're either southern white butterflies or they're checkered butterflies or they're what's the other one? There's like 3-4 different white butterflies that are native that will eat your cabbages, broccolis, cauliflowers, Brussels sprouts, and kales. Those type of butterflies don't like going into shaded or crowded spaces. So this is where like intercropping can be really helpful, right? So if I have like a tomato plant next to a cabbage and the tomato leaves are kind of overshadowing, those type of butterflies don't like coming underneath things because the predators can be hanging out here. So they don't like doing that. Monarchs don't like doing that. Yellow butterflies like your sulfurs don't like coming into tighter spaces. There are some butterflies like usually you'll see this with your black swallowtails. Usually if they're black, they will be more comfortable going into tight spaces. But your typical kind of open vegetable gardening spaces are ideal for them to access plants. So crowding plants together or intercropping the plants with something that's larger that overshadows it, and it doesn't have to be a vegetable crop. It could be any plant that's just not in the same family, will keep them away from laying their eggs on it.
Okay.
So how's that sound?
That's really interesting. So my question is there obviously there's some well, I guess for example, like the monarch butterfly, if it's eating the milkweed, that's
Mhm.
or that's, destructive to the milkweed, but monarch butterflies or the caterpillars, I guess, will they eat on your vegetable plants as well?
No.
They will not.
No.
Okay.
So most butterflies in the United States are specialists, which means they can only host on their host plants. So your monarchs, now your white butterflies, they're still specialists to brassicas. The
Okay.
native plant, at least in the South, I don't know about for the rest of the country, the native plant that their actual host plant is, like in my area, is Virginia pepperweed. So that's their native host plant, but they can eat because it's in the brassica family, they can eat any of the vegetable brassicas too. So
Got
no,
it.
your monarchs won't jump over your most Gulf fritillaries, zebra longwings, giant swallowtails. They're not going to jump over to your vegetables.
Okay. But we want as gardeners, of course, like looking at the monarch butterfly is beautiful, but they are
Yeah.
actually beneficial insects, correct? Like come springtime?
Oh, Yeah. So, oh, this is one of the ones I was teaching you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what a lot of people don't realize. So, milkweed can be also really beneficial for helping keep away some of your undesired butterflies. Well, I want all the butterflies, but let's say you've got a big wide open sunny spot and there's white butterflies coming through. You could move out milkweed in like pots, like swamp milkweed or butterfly weed, which are both native to the majority of the United States, into the spaces, and it could help protect your vegetable crops from things like your cabbage moths. And the reason is that monarchs are super territorial. And as Florida, actually Central and South Florida, we have a year-round population, so I get lots of time to watch them. But monarchs will actually do loops around where their host plants are. So if they have plants that they can get nectar from and they have their host plant, they're so territorial. So they can really, so if you have white butterflies coming in, they will beat them up. Like they will beat up, I've watched them beat up Gulf fritillaries, giant swallowtails, cloudless sulfurs. Like they will come after everything. They do not like other things coming around, even each other. So distributing, and this is one of the tips I've given to people through the years, is like put milkweed like on the perimeters, or you could even put it in the center, and they'll just circle all day around. People think it's just like, oh, they're flitting and floating and dancing and it's beautiful. No, they are not nice. They are mean little bullies to a lot of the other butterflies, and they will come in and attack if they can. So use milkweed to your advantage. So it can be a win-win, right? Because you can be protecting the ecosystem and you can use them as your like personal vegetable security guards flying around during the daytime.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah.
My next question, I want to stay on the topic of butterflies for a few minutes. So
Sure.
so we know the monarch is beneficial. What other butterflies are beneficial?
Yeah, so monarchs are really territorial. There's a bunch that won't like do anything one way or another. They are not going to like hurt any of your plants, but they might not necessarily help you either. I would say monarchs is my number one for like the territorial, like they're going to go after everything else. The other ones who might are sulfurs. So those are your yellow butterflies. So there's a lot of different yellow butterflies, and they don't eat or host on anything that's edible. I don't. Maybe pigeon pea technically is, but they're not going to hurt the pigeon pea. So
Yeah.
those are usually going after your. They use privets and cassias, and there's a lot of different privets and cassias that are native throughout the United States. They use those as host plants. So they tend to have yellow flowers and they're yellow butterflies, and they move really fast. That's kind of their
Okay.
big thing. And so they tend to stay high. So they stay high and then they fly around a lot. So they also can be, that's how they kind of stay above the monarchs. The monarchs, when I watch them, kind of at this level, and then the yellows kind of stay a little bit higher, and will kind of circulate around that way.
Okay.
So those would probably be the ones I would say are the more territorial. Sometimes Gulf fritillaries can be, and that can be a really easy one to get into your garden because of they use passion vines. So this is where if you into passion fruit, they would use your passion fruit as a host plant, but you don't necessarily have to. For those who can grow passion fruit, you could also bring in like corky stem passion vines, which are native through a lot of like the Southeast United States.
Okay.
They also can, but I know the monarchs will drive them off the Gulf fritillaries off if they can. So you might not get too many.
Yeah.
I would say I can give you another benefit that milkweed can do for you for your vegetable garden.
Yeah,
That's
I would love to
beyond
know.
the. So, in the butterfly gardening world, if you get milkweed, the number one like troubleshooting complaint is I got my caterpillars. Oh my God, it's covered in aphids. Like it's covered in aphids. What do I do? And then this is when they start talking about neem oil and BT and all the stuff, or like pulling out hoses or soapy water. So here's what I'll tell you is aphids on milkweed don't hurt the milkweed. And it's like very normal. I have had 3 or 4 different species of milkweed. So there's 100 species that are native to the United States of milkweed. Of the 22 that are native to Florida, I've had 4 in my yard, and all of them get aphids. Everyone gets aphids. It's just like a cycle that they go through. Now, the cool thing is these aphids are oleander aphids, and they are not the aphids that end up on your brassicas. So that's good, right? So we don't need to worry about like these aphids jumping over to our vegetables. The better thing about it and why it will help your garden is one of the challenges is that like a lot of people will talk about pest management in the garden. They'll say like, bring in the predators, like bring in ladybugs. And like, how many times have you heard, Audrey, like people bought ladybugs, they put them in their garden, maybe they ate 2 aphids and then they flew out, right?
Uh-huh.
So if you want like a consistent supply of ladybugs, like you have your milkweed, because the milkweed will get covered with aphids and you're going to not worry about it because they're oleander aphids and no one cares. And then the ladybugs have constant food. So now when the aphids that try to come in that will get onto like your cabbages or your kales, you have lots of ladybugs already hanging out. So you have a constant supply for them. So that becomes like a benefit because now you have more year-round food or more seasonal food for your ladybugs, so they actually stick around. And then when other stuff tries to get in, like they're already there. And
Right.
same thing with predatory wasps, because predatory wasps will eat the aphids, but they'll also eat the baby monarch caterpillars. And I know no one wants
Okay.
to hear that, but in the wild, only 1 out of 10 caterpillars survives anyway. So they feed their baby wasps. And I'm not talking about like what are the really big ones? The
Like
yellow
the yellow
jackets.
jacket. Yeah, yeah.
Usually smaller ones will be the ones who are eating your because they usually go after the baby monarch caterpillars when they're really tiny, not when they're big like this. They go after them when they're like, at least in my area. So then we'll have wasps. And if you were going to try to get wasps, what I would do is have your vegetable garden kind of in the middle and your milkweeds kind of more on the perimeter. So it kind of keeps the wasps out and on the perimeters,
Right.
keeps your monarchs on the perimeters, keeps your ladybugs on the perimeter, and then your vegetables are in the center. So it kind of just makes it a
Okay.
little tougher for anything to get in.
Yeah.
And it keeps all those things in the area of your space.
Okay. That is super interesting. And I think such a good point to point out because once the pests show up, people naturally want then the beneficial insects and they think, I now want to bring them in. But you kind of have to think of it in reverse order of like, how can I get how can I set it up for the beneficial insects to be there before the bad bugs get there, basically?
Right.
And if
Yeah.
they don't have the host plants like you're saying, or they don't actually have food to eat, then they don't have anything to survive. And so
Right.
you kind of want everything. And I think one of the really important things as gardeners is it's like I was just actually watching, this is going to be a side tangent. I was just watching a funny video before we hopped on this call, and it was like all the myths of what companies have like taught gardeners because for their benefit of like selling different products.
Mhm.
And not to put any company down, like everyone's in business to be in business, but when we look at nature, it's like no one's out there spraying weeds and no one's out there spraying bugs, but everything's
Mm.
thriving. Like it just
Yeah.
naturally grows well, like in the area that it's in. And there's always like a little bit of everything. It's like the trees drop their leaves, there's natural mulch, there's all these beneficial microbes because things break down and there's all these varieties of plants. As a home gardener, we try to be very strategic of like, let's put all of the broccoli in this bed and then put all of
Yeah.
the carrots over here. But then really at the end of the day, it's like the more we mix things up and the more different plants we have and the messier it is, the better it is.
Mhm. Yeah. And I can take you through some more tips that come from my monarch gardening.
Yeah,
Because this is like all the stuff that like some of it you know the end result I'm going to tell you, but you don't know maybe why it was so beneficial. So in the world of butterfly gardening, so aphids is one of the big problems. The other thing that like you will see all the butterfly gardeners crying online, rightly so, is that something came and ate the caterpillar, like wasps. And I don't know if you've ever just had the free time to just hang out and watch wasps in your garden. But wasps that go after like monarch caterpillars. I don't know if you guys are familiar with like how milkweed looks, but it's like a straight stick up for most of the varieties, and then it's like leaf, 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 leaf. So there's like these pretty big gaps, right? Which makes sense because then the monarch can get in, and the monarch's about that big, right? So they're getting in, they're like 2-3 inches, right? So they got to get in to be able to lay eggs on the underside of the leaf and the top of the leaf. Well, the wasps, what they'll do, as I've watched them, is they'll come under and check every leaf, right? Well, so all the butterfly gardeners would come to me and be like, well, what do I do about the wasps? Well, one of the things we used to do is we plant our milkweed really close together. And then we would plant another host plant called porterweed in my area, which tinier butterflies will come in and lay their eggs on. But it was like a ground cover, right? And what that allowed is the leaves are closer together. So the monarch had more space to kind of move around. And then what I would watch happen is the monarch caterpillar would go under the porterweed, even though it can't eat it, for shelter. But the wasp wouldn't fly under because it didn't like that enclosed space that was more dangerous for it. So because of that, right, I would say put a ground cover, put these plants closer together, and then it's harder for the wasp to find it. Okay, so if we don't want the caterpillar type stuff on our tomatoes or our cabbages, then let's go the opposite way. Let's not have shelter down at the ground, right? And you hear that kind of stuff like pruning the leaves closer to the ground, spacing stuff apart. And I know sometimes like we try to maximize, right, to fit as much stuff as possible because a lot of the guidelines were developed for like some farmer who has to like get tractors or whatever through the aisles. And we're like, no, you could put them closer. But sometimes I've done it before. Like you go too close. And now what happens is like now the wasp can't get in. And especially with like caterpillars, like cabbage moth or like cabbage worms and tomato hornworms, is birds. Birds are big, right? But they don't want to get in between plants that are really close, right? Because they can't fly off. And what if there's a snake in there? What if there's a cat? What if there's right? What if there's something there? They don't want to go in. So having space allows for your predators to get in and monitor. And so that would be one of my tips is like make sure the ground is kind of clear. Like you can have like a little bit of a mulch, but don't have stuff that the caterpillars can hide under that your predators can't get under, and give a little bit more space so birds and wasps and ladybugs can help you by getting in. Well, not ladybugs. They don't mind as much, but the wasps and your birds get in more.
Okay, such a good tip. So, like you just said with tomatoes, which I actually really agree with spacing my tomatoes, which unlike you guys have lots of humidity and a different kind of heat than we do. We have really hot but dry summers, so we don't have as much of the disease, is what I'm getting at. But I always
Mhm.
have had really good success spacing out my tomatoes pretty far apart just because they can get so huge.
Yeah,
And but I never have any
same.
disease issues. It's easier to harvest. And then I fit
Mhm.
other things in between where I can. Like I'll try to do sometimes like lettuce throughout early and late spring when it and then like the tomato plants eventually kind of start shading the lettuce, but then eventually it gets too hot, the lettuce will bolt. But I don't shove things like you're saying, like right close or try to shove every tomato plant as close as possible. And I also never really have issues with tomato hornworms, but I didn't even think of the spacing as far as that goes. I just more was thinking for production and for disease prevention, but I didn't think
Yeah.
about the fact that that allows probably birds and different things to get in there.
Yeah. No, I mean, birds are a huge benefit. I feel like people talk about the ladybugs. I don't feel like people, I mean, you tell me, because I'm in the native world more than the vegetable, but I feel like people don't talk about birds as much as pest management as they probably should because they're a really big part of helping you, especially with things that are like the caterpillar based pests.
Yeah. I will say I actually don't hardly ever hear about people talking about bringing birds in. But when I think about my garden right now, because we have a really big cattle panel arch that I grow all my tomatoes along, and I do like peppers and squashes and all kinds of things like on all the
Yeah.
sides. And when I walk out there, like at any time of the day, there are so many birds that are like perched on the arch. And then, I go in there and they all fly off like crazy. But I'm like now
Yeah.
thinking through because I have not had, I mean, knock on wood, which I've already been knocking my table around. So let's not knock on wood. Um, but I have not had any pest issues, and I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I think I've been intentional about bringing in lots of different plant varieties and flowers and herbs and interplanting more than, like, I used to do more blocks and, like, squares of the same crop, and that was always an issue. But now I space everything out, like, every, like, 4th plant is something different from a different family. But the birds, I didn't even think about how beneficial they're probably being in the garden right now.
Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of times I'll hear sometimes like birds as it relates to being a pest, maybe eating a pepper, maybe eating a tomato, or corn or something. I don't know, something. They're eating something, but a lot of times, sometimes the bird might not be eating the fruit, but the thing that was eating the fruit, right? So, most people probably don't realize fun facts about North America. Okay, thanks for letting me talk about this because I don't get to talk about this enough,
Yes.
and I really enjoy it. So the majority of our songbirds in the United States, I think it's like 90% of our songbirds eat a diet 100% of bugs. So they don't eat berries, they don't eat seeds, they eat bugs. And what they like to eat is soft body bugs, aka caterpillars, larvae, maggots. Probably not fun to talk about, but like that's what they like to eat. They like to eat those type of things. So when you have a crop that could bring in a caterpillar, right? That's like exciting to them. So being able to have space for them to come in, and the majority of birds most people see in their yard are going to be songbirds. Many of the ones in like suburban environments and urban are omnivores, so they are the ones that can eat usually berries or seeds and bugs. But there are still a lot that really just want bugs. And regardless if they eat berries and seeds when they're older, when they're babies, right? So the mommy and the daddy, they got to feed them only soft body insects. So they want to find plants that are producing, little buggies for them, whether it's going to be your host plants from your butterfly world or they're on the vegetables. The trick is that we don't want our vegetable to be their primary source for soft body bugs because we want the vegetable, right? So
Right.
again, we got to think about like what could they eat when my vegetable is nice and healthy, and then every now and then they come and get like the one caterpillar, right? Or the two
Yeah.
that come on our plants. So that's one of the key things is thinking through like what can I put in the area that lets them come in and eat regularly. And this is where adding a butterfly garden is beneficial. Milkweed wouldn't be the best because those type of caterpillars aren't as good for them, but having other types of butterfly host plants can give a steady supply of caterpillars to them. And then they jump over and then they like find something on your tomato plant or your pepper or whatever, right? And then they jump back. And I've
Right.
similar like on my arches when I've had crops out there, like they're even out there when I like right now when I don't have anything on there because they kind of know they've been trained that this is like a spot for food. And the same thing in the back is having some spots. And there's some other things you can do to encourage birds, like before you even get into gardening, is having like trellises or even just stakes in the ground for them to perch on. And if you can put that perch under a little bit of canopy, because songbirds, right, their predator is going to be hawks. So they don't really want to be eaten from above. So if something gives them a little bit of canopy, like if you have, let's say, an oak tree near your vegetable garden, putting some stakes where they can kind of monitor the vegetable garden while being protected themselves, that they like that.
Okay. Is there any other plants or anything else, like besides giving them like a physical spot to be? Is there anything else we could do to try to attract them into the garden?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the ways is the way you compost could also be a really easy way. So I don't do hot composting. I do black soldier fly composting. Are you familiar with black soldier fly?
Um, I have heard about it, but I have not personally tried it. So I'd love for you to explain it so I can
Sure.
hear and then the view or listeners can hear too.
Yeah, so black soldier fly composting. So a lot of times, right, when people teach composting, they teach the layer method and getting the temperature up, and then or it's using earthworms. For Florida, we can do earthworm composting. We tend to get pretty hot. So a lot of times the earthworm, like if you hear people, a lot of people spend a lot of time like cooling their earthworm composting down in Florida because it just gets too hot and then the earthworms die. So we have, and if you dig in our ground, while you can find earthworms, there's other creatures in this hotter climate that do the work that earthworms do, which is millipedes. But a lot of people don't. That's a whole nother tangent for us to go down. But so when you do your composting, most people are taught like you have to have brown material and green material, right? And you're not supposed to put in meat. You're not supposed to put in milks. You're not supposed to put in like processed stuff because that will attract flies and then you'll have maggots and you could have rats and like all sorts of bad things, right? So black soldier fly composting, the idea is you want to get the flies in because you want the black soldier fly maggots. And the nice thing about black soldier fly composting is those maggots can eat pretty much everything. If you can eat it, they can eat it. So they will eat down meats and milks and all sorts of stuff. And I've taken whole turkey carcasses after we boil it down and make turkey stock. I chuck it out there and they just like eat it down. And they make a very, very rich soil. They don't make it as much. That's the con part is like they won't make it as quantity wise. What they do make, they make it very rich. The nice thing about it is they tend to every now and then want to get away from the compost heap and they fall out. And that would be really gross, except if you put it in a place near where songbirds can hang out, the songbirds will eat them and
Okay.
they know. So so what I do is I put my black soldier fly composting bin near my vegetable garden. So I basically have like my vegetable garden in the back. There's a tomato trellis. There's a mulberry bush tree, which will have berries that the birds like. So they have the trellis to hang out on. They have some additional trees to hang out, and then they have the compost bin behind. So they can hang out on the tree, they can hang out on the trellis, and they go get all the little maggots that fall out. So no, I don't have. You will. It's very rare. Few days a year you'll see a few flies flying around, but mostly you don't see anything. The birds are just eating the maggots all the time. And they
Oh,
bring their
wow.
babies over to it. And then so they're there kind of all the time. Just hanging out,
Yeah.
eating maggots.
What else do you add to that pile to get it going? Do you have to buy like a starter kit to get it going, or are you just putting like
Yeah.
all your left, like scraps and things in there?
Yeah, we just take the scraps from the kitchen and any scraps that come out of the garden and then a little bit of like brown material, so toilet paper rolls, shred it. We have a little paper shredder under my desk and once a week dump the compost from the kitchen in there, and then just some brown material on top. And that's it.
Okay. How
And we
interesting.
do about like a 1-to-1 ratio.
Okay. I'll have to try getting something like that going. And then how long is the process usually from like as you're filling up your bin to then when you're actually putting that into the garden?
I very rarely have ever been able to get really good soil from it. The reason is historically I've had it next to my bananas, so it just would directly feed all my bananas. I just moved it 2 years ago, and we just aren't really getting the production. So I'm not really getting the compost side, but I get the bird side, which
Okay,
for
so
us, the birds are more important because I have that constant bug pressure all year round.
right. So then this is like so interesting, like something so cool to think about because I'm assuming for most gardeners like me myself, I think of like, okay, let's make compost more to feed the garden, but I didn't think about getting something separate going to then attract the birds. Like you don't really need the product for the garden. You are using it to bring the birds in and the birds are then good for the garden.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
The watch out is that it can attract rats, so you will want to do either some like chicken wire underneath it or something like that just to deter them from digging holes and coming up and under. But otherwise, yeah, it's a different way. That's the thing. I try to do things a little bit. Well, I don't try to do it out of the box. I try to figure out what works and makes sense because my primary focus is always like the wildlife, and then my secondary focus is my vegetable garden, which is probably why that's how I've kind of like ended up on some things that I probably wasn't meant to.
It's one of those things which is why I love gardening so much is because there's literally always something to learn. So okay, so we went down the path of the butterflies, which I love that topic. I wanted to ask you with milkweed. So that's actually one plant I don't have in my garden right now, but I want to get into the garden. When is a good time, which as far as climates go, we have a colder winter than you, but still fairly mild. Is milkweed something I could plant right now in the fall?
So for you, since you're in California, so I guess kind of just a little bit of background. So there are kind of three populations of monarch butterflies in the United States. There is the year-round population in Florida, and there's a lot of research for that because there's lots of questions. Then there's the main migratory population that most people think of when they think of conservation, and that's the ones that come sweeping down from Canada. They come through the Great Plains, and then they head down into Mexico, into the forests. And then there's a third population that is coming on the other side of the Rockies, which is the California population. I don't know, and it doesn't make its way up to north the Pacific Northwest. It's basically like California down. So you guys have some different species of plants. That's for one. I just want to call that out. Um, and both, I think California and Florida consider the one that's mostly on the market, the tropical milkweed, aka Asclepia curavasica, is considered an invasive species to both California here. So I just want to give all that facts because if you got listeners in California, both in your state and my state, they do not recommend planting that because it causes lots of problems, which it will spare us that longer conversation. But I just want to make people aware because I know there's so many people with good intentions and they don't know. And then once they know, they feel really bad and then they have to pull it out. So just do more research or check out videos online and you can learn a lot more about why these states are doing what they're doing. But so in the natural cycle is that at this time of year, you could plant seeds as we're in the fall time period because the natural cycle in pretty much the entirety of the United States is that they flower in the summer, then set seed, drop their seeds in the fall. The cold comes through. If you buy seeds online, you'll want to cold stratify, throw them in your fridge for a while. And then you could put them out a little bit later, but you can put them in the ground now and they'll just kind of like hang out
Okay.
in the
So
ground
they won't,
until
they most likely won't sprout till spring.
most likely
Or,
not for your
okay.
area would be my guess.
Okay, I'll
Not in
have
the
to do a little
specific.
bit more research on that. But when you were talking about the invasive species, just not to go
Mhm.
down that whole rabbit hole, but is there then a different variety that I would want to grow?
Yeah, so check out website. It's called Journey North. They track the monarch butterflies. I believe it's them and one other site. They will help you identify the types of milkweed you can grow for your specific area, no matter where you live in the United States.
Okay.
Because what's right for my area isn't necessarily, like I said, there's like 100 native species
Yeah.
of milkweed, and so it's different depending on what part of the country. Like you shouldn't grow aquatic milkweed; it's not from your area.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's from the Everglades and goes up through like the Ohio River Valley. So there's
Okay.
different ones for different areas. And then there's some companies that will then like send you the right seeds for your area.
Okay. Well, I'll link to that below for anyone listening because I would be in. I want to get the right kind in, and that's good to know to not
Hmm.
plant. So it's not about milkweed itself is fine, but just make sure you get the correct variety. Is that correct?
Yeah. And just more so because the reason there's 100 types is because they're adapted to different environments and different ecosystems. So if you, I mean, like if you planted a native milkweed from Florida, like, would it hurt your environment? No, but it probably would die pretty
Right.
fast because they tend to need swampier areas, right? And you're
Yeah.
more arid. So, if you that's one of the problems with like some of the like Monarch survival mixes that are like kind of out there, or Monarch wildflower mixes, is they're like pulling plants from all over the place, and like what works in like Central California is not what works in Maine, wasn't what works down in Louisiana. You know, like it's like these are totally different environments, but they all have monarchs. So, um, if you do pick up something that's like, agnostic to your area, like doesn't really matter and isn't going to hurt anything, it's probably just going to die once it blooms, and then it won't seed well. That would be the worst of it. The one
Yeah.
thing is just stay away from the tropical milkweed because I do know for your state it's considered invasive.
Okay. Perfect. Good to know.
Mhm.
Okay. There's another fun topic I wanted to touch on, and that
Okay.
was about how some of the things we can do to prevent pests for next year is to actually avoid certain plants that we might not realize are the host plants for various pests. So we kind of understand the caterpillars and all the plants that they're attracted to. But we had talked about a little bit the other day that there's a few other plants that are actually host plants to pests that if we just get rid of those plants, our garden is a little bit more pest free.
Okay, yes, this is a problem of the South and very much Florida, that
Okay.
I was talking to you about. But the same idea can apply. I know, so Florida is full of people who the majority of Floridians weren't born in Florida, and that's okay. Me too. But one of the things that kind of freaks people out is they're called lubbers. They're grasshoppers, and they come, I think, around spring, and think like a locust. They just eat everything. So and the myth is that nothing eats them and nothing kills them. And so which isn't really true, but there's a lot of, groundwork from people all around the state trying to show that there are things in the native ecosystem because lubbers are native to Florida. So, like, there's something that they're supposed to eat and not get out of control, and clearly Florida has had plant life for, like, thousands and thousands of years, and the lubbers didn't take over. So, like, there's some sort of balance that was supposed to be happening, and we've clearly tipped it somehow, and it really isn't good for a vegetable garden. And what happens is people get soapy water and all sorts of pesticide sprays and scissors, and it's a whole thing every year. But I've never had lubbers in my garden, and I have a friend who is another gardener, in Florida, and she's told me all about her things and all the things she does, and she's like, "Well, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Well, I do one thing, I don't plant the plant where they lay their eggs," right? So sometimes if you have a pest, and this is what you were alluding to, is like sometimes they didn't come because of your vegetables, they came because there was a host plant. And lubbers use things in the iris family, and they use things in the it's mostly the iris family and the lily family as their host plant. So, and there are native lilies and irises to Florida. There's not a ton of them, and they don't tend to spread very widely because they don't have the right, but they lay their eggs down at the roots. And so what people see them is just like coming out of the ground, but they're not making the connection of like, that's the host plant for it. So if you don't want them, don't have that in your yard, because once they're there and their babies are there, like, it's very hard to get them under control, and they will eat like all the vegetables. They'll eat everything. They'll eat your landscaping plants. They'll eat anything they can get their mouths on. So sometimes like that's one of the tricks is like, and it could be different in different areas. But if the wildlife is native to your area, there's probably some sort of check and balance that's supposed to be happening, and it's probably keying in on something that it needs or wants that's in your garden, and then it jumps over to your lettuce. Like, they
Yeah.
probably weren't coming for your lettuce. They're coming for something else, and then they saw the lettuce or smelled it or ate it or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So for lubbers, like, I don't put any of our native lilies and irises in our yard because I know they'll lay their eggs there, and then they'll come out of the ground in the spring and eat everything.
Yeah. Well, super, just such a good tip of like, I think as a gardener, we just naturally want to be like, oh, it's coming after the plant that the pest is on, but it's like it
Yeah.
most likely could have been attracted from something else. Um,
Yeah.
so
And
such a
sometimes
good
the
point.
other thing that's, like, attracting them to your garden, this comes up more often in Florida with millipedes. So millipedes, if you don't remember, they're the ones with, like, 1,000 legs, and they're different from centipedes. They don't bite you, they don't hurt you. They just kinda wander around, and they eat dead plant material. So people will freak out usually in spring. I'll see a lot of people freaking out about millipedes and what to do with millipedes. And one of the things I try to show people, and this is why it's super important to pay attention to your more local climate and ecosystem. While it's great you follow me and you follow Audrey and you follow other people who are giving you great tips and advice, is pay attention to the plants around you, because millipedes don't eat healthy plants. They eat plants that are stressed and dying. And sometimes bug activity is telling you there's a problem with the plant. It's not because they're like out to get your vegetables. It's because the plant is having a problem. And so the bugs are being attracted because it's kind of like giving out its death call. And so they're doing their part in the environment, right, to clear it out so healthy plants can come in behind it instead of having like a diseased plant that could get out of control and spread to other plants. So sometimes also look at like bugs as I constantly, and I'm sure you do this too, Audrey. It's like, why? Like, why are you here? Because I think too much time is like, well, what do I do? Versus why is this happening? And I was forced to kind of do it because Florida, we grow vegetables on a totally different timetable than most of the country, right? We're starting our vegetable gardens in August so we can end by June. And so a lot of times I see people reacting to bugs in June going like, why are my tomatoes failing? And why are there all these bugs all over my tomatoes? It's like, well, it's the end of the season. And the season's ending not because we have winter coming, but because the sun has gotten insanely intense and the plant's failing. And so it can't handle it. And
Yeah.
while you could put shade cloth up, it's also the bugs are saying the plant's sending out a death signal and a sickness signal. And so it's just ready to go. So just pull it out and be done. Or let them eat it, whichever you want.
Yeah. That is a great point. I'm trying to think of like the exact quote. It was in a past podcast I had with another guest, and he said something along the lines of like, pests are just nature's natural recyclers, and they
Hmm.
like are like warning sign to us of like they're getting rid of unhealthy plants that shouldn't, like just what you just said. But I'm like,
Yeah.
I've heard that put a few different ways, and it's always such a good reminder of like sometimes the pest
Yeah.
is the good thing, and then we have to step back and be like, okay, well, what's actually the cause? It's usually not necessarily a quick fix where rip the plant out and like move
Yeah.
on with your day if you want. But usually it's like something we could learn from and be like, okay, maybe we need to,
Hmm.
be on a better watering schedule. Or like a common thing that I personally see here in the Central Valley or really any hot area is every gardener wants to grow in a container, which is great because it's so easy. But then they grow in this little tiny container filled with potting soil that dries out like in a minute.
Yeah.
And the plant is just stressed. Like there's nothing you could do no matter how much you water it, the soil just dries out so fast, the plant is stressed, and then you typically are going to have pest issues because the plant's so stressed. Um,
Yeah.
so you either have to grow in the ground or grow in a large raised bed with like much more surface area. And in the fall, like for us when it's cooler, container gardening can be great. And then there's usually maybe different pest issues, but summertime specifically, most of the pictures that people send in, it's usually like, well, you're just growing in a little tiny container and it's 100 degrees and the plant is stressed.
Yeah.
But um,
Yeah. And I think this also goes back to like because I grew with native plants and when I went into vegetable gardening, I spent a lot of time looking at like where did the different edible plants come from in the world? And there's so many plants that we're growing. They come from the Americas. So like they're part of like tomatoes while they originate in like South America through Central America. Like there is a type of tomato that's a totally different species that's from Florida. So like it grows here naturally on its own, right? There are native types of peppers to Florida that grow here. Right? There's native pumpkins and squashes all across the United States. So they have a way of functioning here. So you have like when I start asking why, it's like that's why I ask why is it doing what it's doing? Because if it's from here or a similar climate, then we're missing a piece of the puzzle, right? And the
right.
bugs, like you said, it's just telling us that something's not right.
Yeah. I like that you brought that up about like researching about what grows well from different areas or where plants are actually from.
Hmm.
Like to think about how like just with native plants, like I could look at what's native to Central California and you could look at what's native to Central Florida. Same with vegetable varieties. It doesn't necessarily say like they're native to a state or an area, but there is traits like amongst every
Hmm.
vegetable variety that do well in certain areas. So it's just a tip for anyone listening, like do the research actually on the varieties that you grow and look for something that grows well in your climate because there's definitely something out there that you probably haven't grown that just because it's a cucumber doesn't mean it can grow in every state. But you could probably grow a cucumber in every state if you pick the right variety.
Yeah.
Um,
And even in that vein, one of the things I researched, for Californians and Floridians, this should give them a lot of confidence because we're like the fruit and vegetable capitals of the United States. But like, what what like okay, so I looked up USDA data and Department of Agricultural information for my state because when you start seeing what your state grows, then it should give you more confidence that you can figure it out for yourself. Like a lot of at-home gardeners for my state, like, were like, corn, why, right? Like, but did you know Florida's the number one state for growing fresh sweet corn?
I did not know that
I
actually.
didn't know that either. So this is like the beginning of my like this year as we're going into our vegetable season. I'm like, I'm figuring corn out because like apparently we can grow it really well. It's just us at home gardeners haven't quite like cracked the formula yet. But
Yeah.
it's apparently something we do very well. Like we're the number one state for fresh tomatoes for the United States. I'm like, so which is I tomatoes is easy peasy once you figure it out for Florida. But like once you start knowing stuff like that, then you're like, oh wait, like if the farmers can do it well and economically, like then like you said, like, what's the variety? Is it maybe I need to start things earlier or later? Sunnier, shadier, more water, less water, different fertilizing schedule, whatever. Like something you can crack the code on and then figure it out.
Yeah. Ah, so good. Well, I know we're getting close to the hour, so I just wanted to quickly say to everyone listening, if you enjoyed this conversation and enjoyed learning from Jacqueline, she's actually one of the speakers at the Spring Gardening Summit coming up in February of 2026, which is a few months out, but it's going to come quickly. So, Jacqueline, will you tell everyone what you're going to be speaking on and if they want to learn more about your presentation, plus more about your business, how they can follow along, just all the fun stuff?
So at your summit, I'm going to be talking about integrating different, I mean, it's kind of a little bit of, you got like a teaser of some of the topics, but integrating different strategies into your vegetable garden to minimize pests in a very natural way. So it's your natural pest management. No chemicals needed, just wildlife and good things. So that's what I'll
Love
be
it.
talking about. And for me personally, if you want to come hang out and hear and or see my wacky adventures and learn how to garden in a subtropical, tropical climate in the United States, or you're in the middle of winter and you just want to see some pretty flowers and vegetables happening in real time, you can check me out on YouTube at Wild Floridian. That is the name of my channel because I'm a little bit wild and I'm definitely Floridian.
Love it. Well, thank you so much. This was such an awesome episode, and I'm sure everyone's going to enjoy listening. So I'll link to everything that we mentioned today below. And Jacqueline, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Audrey. Bye, everyone.